He thought marrying the least glamorous daughter of a billionaire would be just a ticket out of poverty, but the moment they stepped out of that courthouse, everything changed. What he uncovered that day flipped his entire world upside down. Stick around till the end and drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more stories like this. The garage smelled like burnt oil, sweat, and years of hard work. It clung to everything: the air, the walls, the tools, and the skin of a young man hunched over the sputtering engine of an old Dodge Charger. His name was Jamal Rivers. He'd worked in this East Detroit shop since he was 16. Now 24, Jamal could pinpoint car problems just by listening to the way the engine coughed. His hands, worn from years of labor, moved with the kind of confidence that only came from experience. Jamal didn't just grow up in the neighborhood, he survived it. In a place where hope was rare and ambition was seen as delusion, his mother Denise raised him and his two younger sisters on her own. She worked nights at a hospital and cleaned offices on weekends. There were months with no power, no real food, just condiments in the fridge and silence at dinner. And yet, Jamal never got into trouble. He stayed focused. He dreamed of something bigger. He taught himself computer systems and engineering in the few quiet hours he had after work, taking free online courses even when he could barely keep his eyes open. But dreams don't pay bills, and Jamal was running out of time. Then one Tuesday afternoon, everything shifted. A sleek black limousine pulled into the lot. Jamal had just finished his third brake job of the day and was scrubbing grease off his arms when the car rolled to a silent stop near Bay 3. The windows were so dark they blocked out the daylight. Even before the driver stepped out, Jamal knew this wasn't your usual customer. The driver was built like a wall, dressed in a tailored suit with a very visible outline of something holstered beneath it. Without saying a word, he popped the hood. Jamal approached, wiping his hands on a rag. "Engine trouble?" The driver didn't speak, just gestured at the engine. Jamal leaned in. It was pristine, too clean for a car that size, but something was off. He listened closely. A faint timing issue, hard to catch in a regular car, critical in one like this. After a few minutes, he looked up. Timing chains slipping. Small issue now, but it'll hurt performance fast. The driver nodded and made a quick call. Moments later, the rear door opened. Out stepped a man in a tailored charcoal suit, older, confident, with silver hair slicked back like he'd walked straight out of a boardroom. He didn't glance at the car. His eyes locked directly on Jamal. "You diagnosed that faster than most of my engineers," he said calmly. Jamal shrugged. "It's what I do." "I'd like to talk, privately," the man said. Everything about it felt off, but Jamal found himself sliding into the back of the limo, leather seats cool and clean. The man closed the door behind him, sealing the noise of the world outside. "I'm Peter Holt," he said. "You don't know me, but I promise you've felt my presence. I own Holt Enterprises, real estate, biotech, logistics, and I'm looking for someone like you." "Someone who fixes cars?" Jamal asked, cautious. Peter smirked. "Someone who observes, who executes, who keeps things quiet. Clean record, no baggage, ambition, but not greed." Jamal raised an eyebrow. "What are you asking me to do?" "I want you to marry my daughter." Jamal froze. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Peter said. "Marry her. I'll cover tuition at any school. You'll get housing, transportation, a generous allowance. After a year, you can walk away with everything I promised." Jamal stared. "Why?" "That's not your concern. But if you must know, she needs someone stable, someone who doesn't want anything from her, someone who doesn't care about our money. She doesn't know about this yet. You'll meet her soon. The ceremony will be private. No press. No spotlight." Jamal hesitated. "What's the catch?" "She has scars, some visible, some not. She's not what the world would call perfect, but she is my daughter." That day, Jamal was dropped off 2 blocks from the shop. He didn't tell a soul, not his boss, not his mother. That night, he sat on the edge of his bed in their small apartment, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this strange offer could really be the key to everything he ever hoped for. He hadn't slept since the meeting. Over the next few days, Jamal tried to push the offer out of his mind, but it clung to him. Every long shift, every rude customer, every skipped meal made it harder to forget. He started researching Peter Holt, and everything checked out. Business journals, awards, interviews. The man was real. So was his empire. Then Jamal found a blurry photo of Holt's daughter, Margaret. Grainy and low-res, she stood slightly behind her father, her face half hidden by shadows. Her skin was pale, uneven, her mouth subtly twisted to one side. A scarf covered most of her head and neck. Beyond that, the internet was silent. No interviews, no accounts, just tabloid rumors calling her a recluse. Jamal showed the photo to his mother. She frowned. "What is this about?" "Nothing," he said. "Just something I came across online." She didn't buy it, but she didn't ask again. The next day, Jamal called in sick. He didn't go to the garage. He just walked. For hours, thinking, doubting, weighing everything. By week's end, he had made up his mind. The second meeting was held in a private hotel suite. Peter Holt sat at the head of a table, a stack of legal papers in front of him. Jamal signed them, non-disclosure forms, prenuptial agreements, everything, his hand only trembling once. It was all so clean, so clinical. "You'll meet her tomorrow," Holt said, gathering the pages. "She's not used to company. Be patient." Jamal just nodded. When he stepped back out into the sunlight, the city somehow looked brighter, but colder too, like something irreversible had just happened, and maybe it had. The morning of the wedding came gray and still, as if the sky itself was unsure about bearing witness. Jamal stood in front of the mirror in the most expensive suit he'd ever worn. It fit like armor, looked sharp, but inside he was anything but calm. No friends, no best man, no ceremony music, just silence and a ticking hotel clock. The same limo picked him up, the same driver, same unreadable face. They drove through the city like shadows, avoiding traffic like it was choreographed. No one told Jamal what to expect. He hadn't dared to ask. The courthouse felt more like a tomb than a chapel. A clerk led him through narrow hallways to a small room, just a desk, a wilted bouquet, and a silent officiant flipping through papers. Margaret was already there, standing by the window, her back to him. When she turned, Jamal felt his breath hitch, not out of surprise, but reality. Her face bore the evidence of a story written in pain, scars that traced from her jaw to her collarbone. One side of her mouth curved oddly. A thin veil hung around her head, barely hiding anything. But her eyes were alert, steady, watching him with a quiet calculation. No words, no introductions, no rings, no vows beyond the legal bare minimum. Just two strangers signing a contract neither fully understood. Once the documents were stamped and certified, Margaret looked at him only once before turning back to the window. "The car's waiting," she said quietly. They exited through the back of the building. The wind lifted her veil slightly, revealing more of the scars. Jamal forced himself not to react. This was a deal, nothing more. But something about the way she held herself, rigid, yet composed, stirred something he couldn't name. The limousine was idling. They stepped inside. The silence between them was heavier than leather. Then, without warning, a crack shattered the front windshield. The driver slammed the brakes. Jamal lurched forward, catching himself. Another shot. This one punched through the back glass. The driver shouted something, already reversing hard. A third bullet tore through the side door, missing Margaret by inches. She didn't scream, didn't duck, just froze, eyes wide, breath held. Jamal reacted instantly. He threw himself over her, shielding her with his body as the limo fishtailed into an alley. Shots still rang out, loud and chaotic. The driver cursed. "Out! We're compromised. Move!" Now holding a weapon, he scanned the rooftops. Jamal dragged Margaret toward the door. She didn't resist. They stumbled outside. And that's when everything changed. The alley behind the warehouses smelled like exhaust and adrenaline. The driver didn't slow down. He rushed Jamal and Margaret into a waiting black SUV. Another man in a suit was already behind the wheel. The doors slammed, tires squealed. Within seconds, they vanished into the streets of the city. Jamal leaned back, still catching his breath. His pulse raced. His body was tense, alert. Margaret sat beside him, no longer wearing her veil. Her face was pale but calm, composed in a way that didn't match what they'd just escaped. She didn't speak, didn't even look at him. She stared forward like nothing had happened. "What was that?" Jamal finally asked, his voice tight. No answer. The SUV kept moving. For over an hour, it zigzagged through back roads, industrial areas, and wooded hills, changing directions constantly. It felt deliberate, like someone was trying to shake off a tail. Eventually, they arrived at a massive gated estate hidden deep in the countryside. Armed security let them through without a word. The building ahead looked more like a fortress than a home, all stone, glass, and cold geometry. Inside, they were shown to a guest suite that felt more like a luxury hotel than a sanctuary. The walls were bare, the furniture pristine, but impersonal. A fire crackled in the hearth, but it gave no warmth. The driver finally spoke. "You'll be safe here for now. Don't leave the property. We'll be in touch." Then he left. No further explanation. Jamal sat down slowly, still trying to understand what just happened. Margaret stood near the window again, in the same quiet pose. "You okay?" he asked. She turned. "This was always going to happen." "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said evenly, "you married into a war." Jamal blinked. "A war with who?" "I don't know exactly," she said, "but I've been a target since I was 9. My father never tells me the whole story. Just new houses, new guards, new walls. But they always find me." Jamal leaned forward. "So why the marriage? Why get me involved?" She sat across from him, her face softer now. "Maybe to make me someone else's responsibility." There was no bitterness in her voice, only exhaustion. Jamal didn't know what to say. This wasn't what he agreed to. He expected something unusual, sure, but not bullets, not secrets, not danger, not this. And yet, he looked at her again, really looked. The scars were old, the features unconventional, but she held herself with quiet strength, like someone who had nothing to prove and everything to survive. He'd never seen anyone quite like her. "I didn't know," he said at last. "Your father didn't tell me anything." "Of course not," she replied. "He never does." The fire crackled in the silence between them. Margaret stood and nodded toward the hallway. "There are 2 bedrooms. Use whichever. I'll take the one at the end." She left without another word. Jamal stayed by the fire long after she was gone, watching the flames flicker. His thoughts were a mess. Who were those people? Why now? What kind of man thought a wedding was the answer to all this? Part of him wanted to run, call his mother, pretend this was just a bizarre nightmare. But he could still feel the heat from those shattered windows, hear the gunshots echoing in his bones. Hours passed. He didn't move. Around midnight, he finally walked down the hallway. He paused outside her door, listened. Nothing. He turned and entered the other room, the guest room. The sheets were crisp, the bed too large, the silence too complete. Jamal lay awake until dawn, watching shadows stretch and shrink across the ceiling, knowing that nothing in his life would ever be the same again. The next morning came quietly. Pale sunlight spilled across the stone floors like ribbons, soft and silent. Jamal sat up slowly. His body was stiff, his thoughts no clearer than before. The house was silent. No guards, no sounds, no signs of anyone else. Just him. And somewhere, Margaret. In the kitchen, he found a fully stocked fridge. On the marble counter, a handwritten note. Eat, rest, stay inside. No signature, no details. He made himself a cup of coffee and stood by the window. Tall hedges lined the property. Beyond them, woods. And beyond the woods, the rest of the world. But for now, they were sealed off from it, trapped in luxury, isolated, and still hunted by forces they didn't understand. Margaret entered just as he finished his second cup. She wore a long sweater, leggings, and soft slippers. Her hair was down now, her scars more visible in the morning light. She didn't say anything at first, just poured her own coffee. "I didn't know you drank coffee," Jamal said, surprised at how dry his voice sounded. "I drink everything," she replied simply. They stood there, two strangers in a silent mansion, sharing nothing but coffee, and the weight of a truth neither one could yet explain. "Can we talk?" Jamal asked at last. Margaret placed her mug on the table and nodded, taking a seat. Jamal joined her, unsure how to begin, but needing answers. "Last night, you said you've been a target since you were 9. What did you mean?" She stared at her hands for a moment, as if measuring every word. Then she looked up. "There was a fire at our house in Connecticut. I was 9. My mother and I were home alone." Her voice didn't shake, but there was something in her eyes that did. "I don't remember much, just heat, smoke, and screaming. She died. I didn't." Jamal leaned forward, listening without interrupting. "A neighbor pulled me out. My face was burned. I had to go through skin grafts, surgeries. I spent almost a year in the hospital. My father didn't visit until week 5. When he finally came, he was different, distant, cold." "Was it an accident?" Jamal asked gently. "That's what they said, faulty wiring. But years later, I overheard him on the phone, yelling at someone. He said something about how they sent a message and how this can't happen again." Jamal frowned. "You think it was intentional?" "I don't think," she said quietly. "I know." She went on. Her mother had been working on something legal, a file she never let anyone else touch. Then one day, it vanished. A week later, the fire. Jamal sat back, trying to process it all. Margaret watched him, cautious but open. She wasn't trying to convince him. She was simply telling him what she lived. "So, why didn't your father protect you better?" She gave a bitter smile. "He did, in his own way. New homes, new guards, fortresses like this. But never a real family, never love. I became something he needed to manage, not someone he cared for." Jamal stared at her. "So he married you off, to me." She nodded. "If I'm married, I'm technically independent. My trust changes. My presence becomes someone else's problem." That hit him like a stone in the chest. This marriage wasn't about protection or hope. It was strategic exile, a way for Peter Holt to wash his hands of his own daughter without headlines. "But why me?" Jamal asked. "Why some mechanic from Detroit?" She shrugged lightly. "Maybe he thought you were poor enough to say yes, smart enough to handle the basics, quiet enough to not dig too deep, and alone enough to go along with it." She smiled, not with cruelty, but with quiet understanding. "You're not stupid, Jamal. You're just like me, alone." The words hit harder than he expected, because they were true. Jamal had always carried that solitude, despite his sisters, despite his mother. The ambition, the struggle, the silence. It was a familiar weight. They didn't speak much after that. But something shifted. Jamal asked about her childhood. She spoke about armed security, silent tutors, therapy sessions in place of friendship, and birthdays without guests, Christmases that started with screenings and ended with silence. He told her about Detroit, about cracked sidewalks and long bus rides, about corner stores and broken windows, about falling asleep to sirens and waking to his mother's arms. Their worlds had nothing in common, and yet the feeling, the isolation, was the same. Later that day, Margaret showed him a photo, a faded Polaroid of her and her mother at a swing set. Her mother's smile was radiant, curly hair, kind eyes. Margaret, younger, mid-laugh, unscarred and full of life. "She was a lawyer," Margaret whispered. "She believed in justice. I think that's what got her killed." Jamal stared at the photo, then handed it back. "Do you still believe in it?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But I want to." That night, they shared dinner, something simple. Jamal made pasta with garlic and oil. Margaret set the table. It felt strange, almost domestic, but also strangely human. They ate in silence, not heavy this time, just cautious. New. Jamal glanced across the table, seeing her differently. The stiffness was still there, but there was something beneath it. A wit, a quiet strength, a sharpness she tried to hide. "You know," he said, "I came into this thinking I'd be rescuing you." He smiled softly. "Now I realize, maybe you didn't need rescuing. Maybe you just needed someone who wouldn't walk away." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Later, lying awake again, Jamal stared at the ceiling. But something was different now. He wasn't thinking of running. He was in this, with her, for real. The next few days passed in a strange quiet, heavy, patient, suffocating. The estate, once cold and sterile, now felt like a trap. The silence wasn't comfort. It was control. The tall hedges, the locked gates, the absence of sound. They whispered the truth he could no longer ignore. This wasn't a sanctuary. It was a cage, a beautiful one, but a cage all the same. Since their conversation, something in Margaret had shifted. The quiet resignation was gone, replaced by a tension Jamal could feel in the air. She moved through the estate like a shadow pacing the halls with restless energy. She barely ate, rarely spoke, and often disappeared into the upstairs rooms without a word. Jamal began to notice little things, how she flinched at sudden sounds, how her eyes never stopped scanning the windows. She wasn't relaxing, she was bracing, waiting. On the fourth evening, as the last sunlight turned the sky a burnt orange, Jamal finally asked the question that had been gnawing at him. "They're coming again, aren't they?" Margaret didn't answer right away. She sat near the window, hands clasped, watching the tree line. Eventually, she nodded. "It's only a matter of time." Jamal stood abruptly, running a hand over his head. "Then why are we still here? Why hasn't your father done anything? More security? Another relocation?" She turned to him, and for the first time since they'd met, he saw something like fear in her eyes. "Because he wants them to find me." The words landed like a punch. Jamal froze. He searched her expression for sarcasm, doubt, anything that would tell him she didn't mean it. But she was completely serious. "He's done it before," she said. "He makes it look like protection, but it's just enough to seem real. He leaves the back door open, every time." Jamal shook his head. "Why would your own father want you dead?" "Because I'm inconvenient. Because I know things I shouldn't. Because I remind him of everything he tried to erase." Anger began to rise inside Jamal, hot and unfamiliar. He'd grown up surrounded by injustice, but this was something else. This was betrayal, engineered, personal. "I'm not staying here," he said. "I'm not waiting for another ambush." Margaret stood. "Where would we go? We don't have IDs. No money, no safe house." "I know someone," Jamal said. "Someone who owes me. He can help." He didn't wait for her to object. He grabbed the duffel bag he'd quietly packed that morning, just in case, told her to do the same. 10 minutes later, they slipped into the old servant corridor and exited through a maintenance door on the estate's side. Margaret had stolen a security pass weeks earlier. The door beeped, clicked open. They vanished into the woods before the surveillance could catch up. They walked for nearly 2 miles, through brambles, shadows, and silence, lit only by moonlight and the glow of Jamal's phone screen. By the time they reached the road, they were scratched, filthy, and breathless. Jamal flagged down a passing truck, slipped the driver a few crumpled bills he'd stashed in his boot. The man didn't ask questions, just nodded. They reached Albany just before sunrise. Jamal hadn't seen Malik in nearly a year. They'd gone to school together, lost touch, then briefly reconnected when Jamal helped him avoid a fallout with a shady supplier. Malik now lived above a tire shop he co-managed. It wasn't glamorous, but it was off the grid. He opened the door in boxers and a t-shirt, blinking like he was seeing a ghost. "You look like hell." "I need a place, just for a few days." Malik glanced at Margaret. He didn't ask questions, didn't stare. "All right," he said, "but no trouble. I've got my kid on weekends." The apartment was small, just 1 bedroom, a bathroom, and a kitchenette. But the locks worked. And that night, huddled beside an old radiator, wrapped in borrowed blankets and sipping instant soup, Jamal and Margaret exhaled for the first time in days. "We can't run forever," she said. "I know," Jamal replied. "That's why we're not." He had spent the past 2 days making encrypted calls, sending out discreet messages, and piecing together a plan. One of those calls went to Adrian Webb, a freelance journalist who had once exposed shady offshore deals linked to Holt Enterprises. She'd been blacklisted for it, but kept working, quietly. Jamal sent everything he had: internal memos Margaret had stolen before the wedding, suspicious financial statements, confidential emails. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. Adrienne called back the next evening. Her voice was hushed but intense. "You've got something here," she said. "But if I go public, there's no walking it back. This will burn bridges you'll never rebuild." "Then burn them," Jamal answered. Later, while Malik was out, Jamal found Margaret in the bedroom. She stood in front of the mirror, not hiding, her veil gone, her face uncovered, her scars fully visible in the sunlight. Her hair was tied back, her jaw set. "I want to help," she said. "You are helping," he replied. "No," she said, turning to face him. "I mean really help. I'm done hiding." And just like that, they became a team. She brought the knowledge, the names, the patterns, the secrets. He brought the tech, the tools, the skill to turn fragments into a map. Piece by piece, they began to uncover a story much bigger than either of them had imagined. 2 people who were never supposed to meet, now taking on the system that tried to erase them both. Together, the breakthrough they were building toward came at a cost neither of them saw coming. 2 nights after they'd settled in, something felt off. Malik hadn't come home. No texts, no calls, which was rare. He always checked in. As the clock ticked past midnight, Jamal's unease hardened into suspicion. Then came the sound of a key turning in the lock. Malik entered slowly, face tight, jaw locked. "I'm sorry, man," he muttered. Behind him, 3 men followed, guns drawn. Everything happened at once. Jamal reacted on instinct. He shoved Margaret behind the couch and lunged at the nearest man, knocking his weapon to the floor. The apartment exploded into chaos. In the small, cluttered space, every wall, every table, every piece of furniture became a weapon or a shield. Malik shouted. Margaret screamed. A shot rang out. Another. Glass shattered. When it was over, 2 of the intruders were down. One bleeding from a deep gash to the head, the other unconscious. The third had fled. Malik dropped to his knees, hands over his head. "I didn't know," he said. "I thought they just wanted to talk, just wanted to take her back." Jamal stared at him, breathing hard, fists clenched. "You sold us out." Malik didn't deny it. He didn't have to. Jamal didn't hit him. He wanted to, but instead, he turned to Margaret, who sat trembling on the floor, her hands streaked with blood from the broken wine bottle she'd used to defend herself. "We're leaving," Jamal said. Malik didn't try to stop them. They left Albany behind in silence, not just betrayed, but hunted, with nowhere to go. No one left to call. They drove for hours through the dark, stopping only when they hit a stretch of highway that felt empty enough to think. Jamal pulled off the road and stared out across the asphalt. "I'm done running." Margaret looked over, startled. "Then what?" He turned to her, jaw set. "We fight. We expose him. All of it." For the first time in weeks, she smiled. Just a little, but it was real. The motel they stopped at smelled like old cigarettes and older regrets. The wallpaper peeled. The bedding looked like it belonged in a museum of poor choices. Jamal stood by the blinds, peering out at the parking lot, scanning for movement. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, hunched forward, gripping the sleeves of her sweater. Neither said much. They didn't have to. The silence was thick with purpose now, not fear. Jamal cracked open his laptop, the screen flickering in the low light. The motel Wi-Fi was garbage, but it was enough to reach Adrian again. He uploaded more files, secured a digital trail. They had damning material, but not enough to seal it. They needed more. They needed proof, a voice from inside, a thread to pull. Margaret finally looked up. "There's someone else." Jamal raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "Her name's Lena Radcliffe. She worked in my father's legal department. My mother trusted her." He closed the laptop. "Do you know where she is?" "She moved to DC after she left the company. Went off-grid, but I have her old number." "Call her." Margaret grabbed her phone and dialed. The line rang 3 times before a woman's voice answered, cautious, unfamiliar. "Hello? Lena, it's Margaret Holt." There was a pause, then a sharp inhale. Jamal couldn't hear the rest, only Margaret's quick, quiet explanation. When she hung up, she looked at him. "She said to come, tomorrow. She'll meet us near DuPont Circle." She didn't say more. It was a risk, but it was something, a thread. And right now, they needed every single one. They slept in shifts that night. Jamal kept a wrench tucked in the drawer next to him, just in case. Margaret curled up toward the wall, her breath shallow, her sleep never deep. When dawn broke, they were already on the road. The drive to Washington, D.C. was quiet. No radio, no music, just coffee, gas, and silence. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was focused. They were no longer just running. They were advancing. Lena Radcliffe met them at a cramped coffee shop squeezed between a print shop and a dry cleaner. She wore sunglasses too large for her face and a coat that said she didn't want to be remembered. Her body language was sharp, every movement calculated, every glance cautious. She hugged Margaret awkwardly, then turned to Jamal. "You're the husband?" "For better or worse," he replied. They sat at a table in the far back, away from the windows. Lena's voice was low and clipped. She didn't waste a word. She had worked for Hall Enterprises for 8 years. She'd seen too much, signed too much, covered up things she still regretted. After Margaret's mother died, she'd asked the wrong questions. And slowly, they pushed her out. They didn't fire her. They isolated her, cut her out of key meetings, dismantled her access. She left on her own terms, but not before taking copies of files she wasn't supposed to have. And now, she was ready to talk. Offshore accounts, ghost companies, payoffs to contractors. Most of it was buried so deep, even I couldn't connect all the dots, Lena said. But Margaret's mother, she was close, too close. I think that's why she died. "Do you still have the files?" Jamal asked. Lena hesitated, eyes narrowing. "Yes, but if I hand them over, I become a target again." Margaret didn't flinch. "We're already targets. Join the club." Lena studied them both for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small flash drive. Use it wisely. Back at the motel, Jamal plugged it in. What he found made his stomach twist. Millions wired to Cayman shell companies, private communications with foreign officials, internal emails casually discussing asset disposal and liability cover-ups. This wasn't corporate fraud. It was something darker, organized crime wrapped in boardroom polish. "We go public," Jamal said. "Everything." Margaret didn't hesitate. "Do it." They contacted Adrienne again, this time with the full package. She promised a feature story in one of the last truly independent investigative outlets. But to make it stick, they needed momentum, support, witnesses, pressure, not just a headline, a movement. Jamal launched anonymously. He created burner accounts, dropped redacted screenshots, posted audio clips, and hinted at a broader conspiracy. He tagged journalists, dropped hashtags, launched a subreddit, corporate confessions, and it worked. In a matter of days, online whispers became something louder. Former employees began to post. Anonymous leaks surfaced. Whistleblowers who had once been silenced started talking. It wasn't just shady, it was systemic, and it was dangerous. But still, they needed one more spark. Jamal looked at Margaret, at her scars, at the silence she carried like armor. "I have an idea," he said. "We make a video, not anonymous. You speak, you tell the truth. You give them a face they can't ignore." Margaret hesitated. "My face is the reason people look away." "No," Jamal said softly. "It's the reason they'll listen." It took hours to convince her. Another day to prepare. They rented a camera, bought cheap lights, turned the dingy motel room into a makeshift studio. No script, no filters, just Margaret, sitting in front of the lens and telling everything. The fire, the scars, her mother's silence, her father's power, the pain, the truth. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She just spoke with a kind of quiet force that shattered every illusion about who she was. The video went live at midnight. By morning, Margaret Holt was trending on every major platform. Calls flooded in. Journalists, advocates, former friends, old enemies. Some defended Peter Holt. Many didn't. Protests erupted outside Holt Enterprises' Manhattan Tower. Stocks dipped. Executives panicked. But attention brought danger. That night, the motel clerk recognized them. Someone made a call. Jamal saw two men in suits approaching the door through the peephole. He grabbed Margaret's hand and ran. They fled through back streets, ducked into alleyways, climbed into the back of a moving delivery truck. It was chaos, sirens in the distance, hearts racing, but they escaped. They spent the night in an abandoned train station, huddled under Jamal's jacket, watching the darkness shift into dawn. "We did it," Jamal whispered. "We made them listen." Margaret didn't speak. She just leaned her head against his shoulder and closed her eyes. That morning, as the city came alive, they stepped back into the world, side by side. No longer afraid, they had cracked something open, exposed a truth too big to bury again. Now, they would face the storm, and the first sign that change was coming didn't arrive with sirens or headlines, but with silence, the kind of silence that follows something undeniable. Margaret's video had done what no lawsuit, no press release, no expose had managed. It broke through. Not because it was polished, but because it was real. No makeup, no script, no voiceover, just a scarred woman with a voice and nothing left to lose. The days that followed were surreal. Jamal's inbox overflowed. Advocacy groups reached out. Political staffers wanted meetings. News outlets scrambled for interviews. And the internet exploded. Some people tried to spin wild conspiracies. Others began sharing their own stories. Former Holt employees, fired interns, a disillusioned ex-security officer, each voice added to the rising chorus. The image of Holt Enterprises as a clean, powerful empire began to unravel, and at the center of it all were two people who were never supposed to matter: Jamal Rivers and the girl they tried to erase. They moved from safe house to safe house, changing phones, IPs, names, but one thing stayed constant: Adrienne Webb. She had become their anchor. The journalist took the evidence Lena provided and spent days authenticating every document, every file, every lead. Her article was ready, scheduled for release on one of the few independent platforms with the reach and integrity to make it count. But the real confrontation came sooner than anyone expected. Hall Enterprises had called an emergency shareholder meeting in New York. The board, rattled by plummeting stock prices and public outrage, demanded Peter Hall make a statement. For the first time in years, the man who built his empire behind closed doors would have to face the public, not in court, but in front of cameras. Margaret insisted on going. She didn't just want to expose him, she needed to look him in the eye. To speak, not just for herself, but for everyone he had hurt and hidden behind balance sheets and legal walls. They traveled to Manhattan under assumed names, sunglasses pulled low, coats hiding their faces, but the city already knew. Protesters swarmed the block around Holt Tower. Police had cordoned off the front steps. News vans lined the avenue. Signs waved, "Justice for Margaret. No one is untouchable. Truth over power." Inside, the air was heavy. Security was tight. But a former employee, moved by Margaret's story, guided them through a service corridor rarely used by anyone but janitors. Margaret knew the building by heart. She had once walked these same halls, holding her father's hand, a child desperate for approval. Now she moved with purpose, no fear, no veil. The conference room was full. Executives, shareholders, journalists, cameras streamed live to millions. On stage, Peter Holt stood flanked by legal teams and frantic PR handlers. He took the podium, calm, controlled, smiling. He spoke of loyalty and legacy, of a smear campaign and manipulated media, of lies turned into headlines. He painted himself as a casualty, an innocent man targeted by bitter enemies and an ungrateful daughter. Then she appeared. Margaret stepped into view. The room fell still. Phones lifted. Cameras pivoted. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jamal stayed at the base of the stage. This wasn't his moment. It was hers. Margaret climbed the steps alone. And for the first time, Peter Holt stopped speaking. "I'm not anonymous," she said into the microphone, her voice calm. "And I'm not part of any campaign." Peter took a step forward. "Margaret, this is neither the time nor the—" "Yes," she said, "it is." The crowd leaned in. "I was 9 years old when someone tried to kill me. My mother died in that fire. I survived, and from that moment, I was hidden, shuffled from house to house, city to city, never to be seen or heard again. My father didn't protect me. He erased me." Peter's face hardened. "You don't understand." "I understand everything," she snapped. "I understand my mother was about to expose your crimes. I understand her death wasn't an accident. And I understand that when I survived, you found another way to silence me." She turned to the audience. "You've seen the documents, the wire transfers, the shell companies, the hush money. You've read the testimonies. And now you've seen the face behind the cover-up. I'm not a liability. I'm not an embarrassment. I'm your daughter." The room was silent. Peter finally spoke, his voice low, tight. "You don't know what it takes to survive in this world. It's not built on truth. It's built on control. Your mother, she should have known that. If she hadn't meddled—" He froze, realizing what he had just admitted. Margaret's eyes narrowed. She didn't meddle. She cared. She tried to protect people. And you let her die. For once, Peter Holt had nothing to say. No rehearsed line, no shield, just silence. An hour later, Adrian Webb published the full story. Documents, memos, recordings, every piece of evidence live and verifiable. Within minutes, the story was everywhere. Markets crashed. Investigations opened. A federal team arrived at Holt Tower before sunset. Peter Holt was escorted from the building in handcuffs, not by his lawyers, but by federal agents. Cameras followed every step, every expression. The empire he built in silence had been shattered by the truth. Back at the hotel, Jamal and Margaret sat by the window, watching the skyline glow in the fading light. The storm had broken, but they weren't hiding anymore. They had told the truth, and the world had listened. Now, they were free to begin again, this time in the open. They watched the footage in silence. The anchor's voice was steady, but urgent, detailing the charges: fraud, obstruction, conspiracy. On the screen, the ticker scrolled: Peter Holt taken into federal custody. Margaret leaned against Jamal's shoulder, her fingers lacing with his. "It's over," she said. "Not yet," he replied. "But the hardest part is—" She smiled, tired but proud. Later that night, Jamal stepped onto the balcony. Below him stretched the city that once felt unreachable. Now it looked different. Less like a war zone, more like a starting line. He thought of all they had survived, the fear, the betrayals, the lies. But he also thought of what they had found, each other, a cause, a clarity that only fire can forge. When Margaret joined him outside, he turned and said the words he'd been holding onto for weeks. "I'm proud of you." She didn't answer. She just rested her head against his chest and whispered, "Let's go home." They didn't know yet where home would be, only what it wouldn't be. It wouldn't be built on silence. It wouldn't be paid for with fear. And it wouldn't belong to anyone but them. For the first time, they were free to choose. In the weeks following Peter Holt's arrest, the world didn't pause. Manhattan traffic still crawled. Deadlines still loomed. People still scrolled headlines on crowded trains, like checking the weather. But for Jamal and Margaret, everything had shifted. The foundation beneath them had cracked, and then reformed into something quieter, simpler, and real. The trial was set for spring. Prosecutors moved fast, armed with the mountain of evidence from Adrian and other whistleblowers. News coverage stayed steady. Weekly segments, opinion columns, debates about legacy and justice. Analysts speculated whether Holt Enterprises would survive. Stocks wavered. Rebranding campaigns launched, but the damage was permanent. Peter Holt was removed as CEO. The company issued glossy promises of transparency and renewed values. But to those who knew the full story, it rang hollow. Margaret didn't watch it happen. She didn't need revenge. She didn't want a headline. She wanted peace. They left the city without fanfare, heading north to the Hudson Valley. A small nonprofit, working with children healing from trauma, had reached out to Margaret, not as a symbol, not as a survivor, but as someone who understood. They offered her a quiet, steady role. It was exactly what she needed. Jamal found his calling too. A tech incubator in Poughkeepsie reached out. Its founder, herself raised in the foster system, had seen the video. She asked Jamal to help launch a youth program for underserved kids with talent, but no access. He said yes. They moved into a small house tucked among trees near the river. It was older than it looked. The floors creaked, and the windows groaned when it rained, but it was theirs. The deed had come with a letter, no signature, no return address, but unmistakably written in Peter Holt's hand. It read, "This isn't an apology. I don't know how to write one, but I do know how to build, and I know when something deserves to be rebuilt. You have my name. You carry my burden. Now you have something else. Do with it what you will." Jamal had considered burning it. Margaret had simply folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. She never mentioned it again. Their days took on rhythm. Morning coffee on the porch, commutes into town, dinners cooked side by side with music humming in the background. On weekends, they volunteered, fixed the old playground, sat in circles with kids who carried their own kinds of scars. Margaret began to paint again. At first it was hesitant, quiet swaths of muted color, but over time, the canvases grew bolder, brighter. Her artwork slowly filled the walls of the house, as if she were reclaiming space, room by room, with every brushstroke. Jamal thrived. He mentored teens who reminded him of his younger self, sharp, skeptical, full of defiance. He taught them more than programming. He taught them how to bet on themselves, how to push back against the quiet trap of low expectations. When he told them what he'd been through, he didn't add drama. He didn't call himself a hero. He just told the truth, and that was enough. It turned out the truth really was enough. The story could have ended there, wrapped in closure, a quiet postscript to a public reckoning. But fate, or maybe unfinished purpose, had one more turn left. On a misty April morning, Margaret got a call from a woman named Karen Blake. She introduced herself as the newly appointed executive director of what used to be the Holt Foundation, a once prestigious charity her father had twisted into a vehicle for fraud. After its collapse, it had been taken over by the state. But Karen had a different vision. "I want to rebuild it," she said. "This time for real. Not as a PR front, but as something that actually matters. And I want you and Jamal to run it." Margaret was stunned into silence. Karen continued, "You don't have to say yes. You've already done more than enough. But if you do say yes, this becomes yours. Fully. No board, no shareholders, just the mission. Just you." It took 3 days to decide. By the end of the week, Margaret was named executive director of the newly reformed Holt Foundation for Recovery and Opportunity. Jamal became director of youth development. And together, they began again. They didn't announce it with press conferences. They didn't hire PR teams. Instead, they listened to caseworkers, educators, kids. They designed programs for children who had endured abuse, displacement, neglect. They focused not on headlines, but on healing. They took no salaries for the first 6 months. They traveled across the state, visiting group homes, classrooms, juvenile centers. Margaret rarely spoke about her past anymore, not because she was hiding it, but because she didn't need to explain it. Her presence was the explanation, not a symbol, not a survivor, a leader. Jamal, too, changed, not because of his title, but because of the people. The boy who wouldn't speak for a week, then finally asked if he'd come back the next day. The girl who said, "Why should I trust you?" and meant it. The 16-year-old who looked at Jamal the same way Jamal once looked at the world, with guarded hope, and who finally smiled. In their home, there were no photos of Peter Holt, no mementos from that old world. But beside the nightstand, there was one painting, a swing hanging from a tree, swaying over a sunlit patch of grass. Margaret had painted it in silence one afternoon, and when she handed it to Jamal, he didn't ask. He knew it was the swing from the Polaroid, the last good memory before everything changed. 1 year to the day after Margaret had stepped into that shareholder meeting, they opened the doors to the foundation's first youth center, a converted warehouse in the Bronx. Bright, welcoming, filled with murals painted by the kids themselves. Families came. A few reporters showed up. Donors shook hands. The mayor gave a speech. But Margaret and Jamal didn't need applause. After the ceremony, they stepped outside, away from the crowd, into the humid spring air. "I never thought we'd come back here," Margaret said. Jamal reached for her hand. "We didn't come back," he said. "We came forward." They walked down the block, past the corner store with a new awning, past the school where Jamal once fixed old computers for free. People recognized them. Some waved, some just nodded, but no one looked away. The world wasn't perfect. Systems still failed, power still corrupted, people still betrayed. But not today. Today, there was a building full of children who knew someone was fighting for them. Today, Margaret and Jamal had something stronger than vengeance, stronger than survival. They had each other. They had a foundation made not of concrete and steel, but of truth, of purpose, of choice. And for them, that was enough. More than enough. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what comes next. Check out our other powerful true stories. And if this one meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thanks for watching.